Hey guys, Pirc Defense is one of the most charming ways of meeting e4. It's a hyper-modern opening, which means that black does not bring pawns early to the center. Instead of that, they develop pieces, targeting the center, and usually they break the center a little later. There are some advantages of playing Pirc Defense. For example, number one is a schematic play, since in most of the cases, black develops the pieces no matter what white does. Number two is a great line if you need to win with black, because usually it leads to unbalanced positions. Number three, there's a psychological advantage for black, as it gives white a false impression of safety. Often white overextends and black turns tables and wins. And number four is versatile, because Pirc Setup works basically versus any line white can play, and also flexible, since you can choose among different setups with breaks over e5, c5, or b5. So we have Pirc Defense on the board after the moves e4, d6, d4, knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4. White needs to play knight c3, and then black plays g6. In this position, black can play three main systems. They can play f4, Austrian Attack. They can play knight f3, which is classical system, and they can also play bishop e3, wanting to play queen d2, f3, which is the 150 attack. We are going to cover the three systems, and I will show you a master's game for each of them, so you have some idea about how can the middle game continue on each line. Also, there are other moves white can try against Pirc Defense. They are not so popular, but still playable, and we can cover them in some next video if you like and enjoy this one. So let's start with Austrian Attack. When white plays f4, white is expanding in the center. They are controlling even more squares, but well, as you can imagine, this is part of the plan for a Pirc Defense player. This is exactly what we want. We're inviting white to play this kind of moves so they weaken squares. Observe this pawn advancing unprotects some squares on white's field. So here we can continue with a normal development like bishop g7. White can try knight f3 here, and well, main line here is castling, but the line I really like in this position is c5, and this is a very normal move in Pirc. The idea is that we want to open the diagonal for our bishop, and that piece is going to be a great weapon usually in these positions. Here there are two interesting options for white. One of them is bishop b5, but this is not really a problem. We play bishop d7 here, and after e5, the best move, we can just play here knight g4. This position is totally fine. Observe that we are putting a lot of pressure on both pawns on the great diagonal, so we are trying to make them move. We're trying to get rid of them, and then our bishop is going to be great again on the great diagonal. Our knight on g4 is actually fine, it's controlling the squares, and even if at some point it has to go to h6 because of some threat, it's totally fine because it comes back over f5. So we should say this position is slightly better for white, but it looks very interesting. Also, the other line instead of bishop b5 is the capture of the pawn on c5, and here there is a surprise. We're not gonna play this and trade queens. That's not what we want to play here. We're gonna play queen a5. This is much more dynamic, and the idea is that there is a pin over here. We are getting the pawn back over here. Now the knight is going to e4, and the bishop, observe, a lot of pressure along with the queen on c3. So this is getting really interesting in this position. If they take this pawn, for example, we can play knight takes e4, and this position is a little better for black. So this is good. Actually, the main line is probably bishop d3 in this position, and then we can just take the pawn on c5. This position, one more time, is slightly better for white according to engines, but well, when we analyze it, we see that it's very easy to play as black. We're controlling u1, so white cannot castle so easily by now, and there is a very natural development for black pieces in the next moves. I found this interesting master's game in an Austrian Attack. Black played bishop g7, white developed the knight to f3. This time they played main line with castling after bishop e3. Black developed the knight to d7. They are reinforcing the breaks over e or c5. White continued e5, but this is not a big problem here. Knight g4 is totally fine, also with tempo, because we're attacking the bishop on e3. Bishop d2 was played, c5, we have already highlighted this idea. E takes d6, c takes d4, now attacking the knight, and after knight takes d4, it is that if black takes that knight, black knight is hanging on g4. However, in this position, the master as black found a really interesting tactic move. I will say it very soon, but if you want to try to find it, it's going to be a really good exercise. Here, black played the surprising move, knight f2. And the idea is that he said, well, I'm going to lose the knight. Well, I'd rather lose it here on f2, making the king to move and also capturing with check later. In the game, white played queen e2, and the idea is that he wanted to capture here on e7 with a fork. But, well, I want to tell you what could have happened after king takes knight. Then we, of course, capture the knight. And after bishop b3, we can just trade and play something like rook e8. And, well, the main problem is the king is very exposed and also very open. I mean, this file is going to be opened very soon, also this diagonal. And white still has some development problems, so this position is going to be much better for black. In the game, as we were saying, queen e2, then black needs to stop that threat, so they just play the e5, is attacking the knight, is also attacking the rook on h1, so white needs to capture the knight. E takes d4, knight goes to d5, knight c5, there is a check, the king goes to h8, and then there is this capture, which is going to leave black with a very interesting position, because now the rook is on the half open file, and this is even better because white castled queenside, so we have even more ideas now that the king is there. The game continued queen b6, and this is a really interesting move. There are many ideas with the queen hanging on the same line as our queen, but also many ideas with the pressure on b2 once we move that pawn away from d4. So the move queen b6 is actually creating some interesting hidden threats. In the game, rook e1, and, well, here it is black to move. Black is winning. I will say it very soon, but if you want, pause the video and try to find it on your own. So, the best move for black in this position, I'm going to say the second best move first. So if you found knight a4 as a good option, you are fine. There's a lot of pressure here on b2. And the idea is that at some point we can play d3 with a check once we sacrifice the rook on c2. So for example, after b3, we sacrifice the rook, and then we can play d3 and get that queen on f2. Of course, this is much better, or decisive advantage for black. But actually the best line is when we play d3 here. And the idea is that now we are clearing two lines at the same time, this one and this one. So now we are threatening queen takes b2, but also we are threatening discovered with the knight to get the queen on f2. So after d3, white can try c3 to stop the threats, but then we can play knight b3 check and queen takes queen, decisive advantage for black. And that's why white resigned in this position after this d3. The other line is when white plays the classical system with knight f3. Here we are gonna play normal developments, bishop g7, bishop e2, we castle, white castles as well, and we can continue here with c6, wanting to expand a little on the queen side later. White can continue here a4, and a very normal move for black is queen c7. The idea is that we want to continue our developments, and we could be planning here knight bd7, b6, and bishop b7. This way we are putting our minor pieces to play, and of course in the middle game we are going to prepare some break, almost for sure over e5 is going to be very well. One more time, white is slightly better, but, well, they could stay lost if they risk more than they should, as black pieces are going to be in really good positions. You might be wondering, how would the middle game be in this line? And, well, there's this example that I think is going to be really good. Black played here bishop g7, white continued bishop e2, black castled, and white castled. And this time, black tried bishop g4, also an interesting line. This bishop g4 is typical in this kind of positions. The idea is that sometimes you can get rid of the knight, which is a great defender of the center. And remember, one of the ideas in Pirc is to put pressure on white's center. So if you remove a defender, obviously it's going to make it easier. Also, sometimes we don't have a good square for the bishop over this diagonal, so a solution is just put it on g4 and trade it for the knight, and it's usually more or less fine for black. So the game continued a4, then knight c6. then a5, and then, well, a6, so the pawn does not advance more than it should. Bishop e3, and then the typical break on e5. White played d5, knight comes back to e7, knight d2, there's a trade of bishops, and then this move queen d7. Observe, we have a blocked center here. Usually when this happens, there will be play on the wings of the board. We have more space on the king side, so black is going to play and break over there, as white has more space on the queen side, so they will be breaking over c5 probably. That should be the way we continue in the middle game in the next moves. White played here knight a4, black played knight h5 after c4, well, f5, and then we are breaking some ideas with f4, so white needs to play here f3, there's a trade, knight takes e4, and then this move knight f5. White played g3, but I want to highlight this line g4 forking is not really getting material, as black can save the knights by attacking the queen. So black can play knight f4 here, and after bishop takes, we have in between knight d4, and then we are getting the bishop. In the end, white doesn't get material up, and they just discovered the king and weakened important squares. So in the game, they just played g3 and this move rook f7. White wants to keep the bishop on the board, so they played bishop f2, then bishop h6, improving the bishop, controlling g5, queen d3, and then rook a to f8. This is a half open file, there's a lot of pressure here on f3. In this position, white played rook e3, which turned out to be a mistake. Actually, knight a c3, controlling some key squares, was still fine. However, after rook a3, there is a complicated but strong sequence for black. The master played here knight h4, and the idea is that now the pressure on f3 is too much, and also once you get rid of that pawn, you're playing queen g4 with many threats. Well, g takes h4 was played, they needed to accept, and then rook takes f3. Queen d1 was played here, but also I want to show you what happens if white accepts the rook, like queen takes rook, trying to get two rooks for the queen. Anyone could say is more or less fine, is more or less equal, but this time it's not. So black can take the queen, and after rook takes rook, there's queen g4 check, and then we are attacking rook, we are attacking the knight, and after bishop g3 defending the rook, well, we can play queen takes e4. This position is much better, like decisive advantage for black. The problem is that the king is very discovered, but also black's minor pieces are much better, as they can go to e3 and f4, and this knight is out of play. And also black is getting more pawns. I mean, they already have like one pawn over here, but also they can get more pawns in the next moves. So in the game, queen d1 was played, and then queen g4 is very strong. Knight g3, knight takes, g3, h takes, g3, and in this position it is black to move. Black is winning. I invite you to try to find the best move. I will say it very soon. The tactic move for black in this position, just winning the game almost immediately and forcing a resignation for white here, is going to be the sacrifice rook takes f2, which is a little surprising because the queen is hanging, but it's fine because we lose the queen, but we get the king. So rook takes f2, and white resigned. If white accepts the queen, like queen takes g4, then we will have checkmate in 3 moves, like rook takes rook, rook f2, and rook h1. And the third popular line we need to study is the 150 attack, and this happens when they play bishop e3, wanted to play queen d2, f3, castling queenside, and then attack over there, g4, h5, bishop h6, and a really interesting attack by white. Well, this time we're gonna play c6, and we're one more time trying to expand on the queen side. After queen d2, we can play b5, and after f3, typical move, defending the center, controlling g4 very well, and also guarding the advance of the g-pawn. We can play here knight b d7. After g4, well, our knight is going to be great on b6, ready to go to c4 at some point. White can play h4. The attack looks strong on the king side, but the good news is that we haven't castled on that side of the board, and also we don't need to rush about castling on that side of the board. Also, we can even castle queenside or stay some time in the center and make the decision a little later. So we can play here b4, and after knight d1 there is this typical move h5 where we make sure we are stopping the advance and we are stopping the attack for some time, and we are making sure white is not opening more lines on the king side than they should. So g5 is probably a move here, knight d7, and after queen takes b4, bishop g7, this position is very well. White has a pawn up, but I think the compensation is more or less clear. They still have some development problems, the king in the center. We have a half open file, there's a coincidence of the half open file with the great diagonal, and probably we are playing c5 sometime soon. And this time castling kingside is not a huge problem because they are not really opening lines over there. So there is a pawn up for white here, but that's not a problem for a Pirc Defense player. In general, when we play Pirc Defense, we are willing to sacrifice some pawn for some good compensation. I found this example by a grandmaster. Black played bishop g7, white played queen d2, he castled, and then bishop e2, which is not very normal. I mean, in this position, castling queenside or f3 are the most normal moves. So bishop e2 was played, but it's still fine for white, it's just a development move. And black continued e5. After d takes e5, d takes e5, white castle. There is a trade of queens, and anyone could say it's going to be a slow game, but nothing about that. The game continued knight c6, knight f3, b6, and h3. After bishop b7, rook h d1, there is rook f e8 and bishop c4. As the pawn on e5 is protected, black can try knight a5, increasing the pressure in the center, but also getting a tempo over here. Bishop b5, c6, bishop f1, and well, a normal move here is c5, opening the diagonal again. Black just played b5, also interesting, expanding a little on the queen side. b4, knight c4, and after bishop takes c4, b takes c4, g4, there is this move a5. Even when the queens are not on the board, there might be some chance of starting some kind of initiative, as we have opposite side castlings. B takes a5, and then there is this move I find really instructive. The pawn has been on e5 all the game, is actually blocked in this position, so there's no way to get rid of move our pawn. So we need to activate our bishop, and this time we have this option. Bringing the bishop to f8 is going to be much better, as we will be threatening bishop b4 or bishop a3. So the game continued bishop f8, g5, bishop a3 check, and king b1. In this position, there is a mistake. Black played bishop b4, which is not as strong as it seems. The right move for black was the surprising c5. And the idea is that after pawn takes knight, there is another crazy move. Bishop takes e4, it's losing the bishop, but it's making sure they have a draw when they bring the rook, and they use the bishop with the checks. So now we're attacking the knight on f3, white needs to capture, and then we can play, for example, rook b8 and bishop b2 check. After king b1, well, we can repeat, and this is a draw. Well, that was the best option for black instead of bishop b4, c5. In the game, bishop b4, but after pawn takes knight, bishop takes knight, white should have played rook d7, and they're totally fine. One of the keys is that at some point they can play rook a7 if they need to block this file. Well, in the game they played rook d6, and this is going to be a blunder. After rook a5, they realized they had made a mistake and played rook d7, but it's too late. It is black to move here. Black is winning. I will say it very soon, but it could be great if you could find it on your own. The move this master played in this position just to win the game, we could say immediately, is the rook sacrifice on a2. So rook takes pawn is just winning the game. As the pawn is controlling b3, the king won't be able to escape over there, so we can just play rook a8, and after king b1, well, typical mate here with rook a1. So I'm gonna show you typical tactics for Pirc Defense positions. This is going to be a good training, because whenever you get one of these ideas that happen very often when we play Pirc Defense, you will be much better prepared to find it in your own games. So for example, this is the first position out of 5, and we're going to be increasing the level of difficulty. So black to move here, black is winning. I will give you some seconds as you try to find it, and I will explain it almost immediately. So the best move in this position for black, they can get not too much, only 1 pawn, but it's enough to get an important advantage. It's going to be knight takes e4, and the idea is that if white takes the knight, then we can take the knight on c3. There's a pin over here. Also the bishop is going to be hanging if we need. So after bishop takes knight, well, bishop takes c3, and if b takes c3, queen takes b1, this is winning for black. And this is position number 2, black to move, black is winning. I will say it very soon. So in this position, well, first of all, the knight is hanging on c3, and this is going to be decisive, but well, it's not only about the knight, there is also another double threat here that is going to be winning. So black can play here knight g4, and the idea is that we are threatening queen h2, checkmate, but also we are threatening the continuation knight takes bishop followed by bishop d4 with a pin. There's no way white can defend against this double threat. So after h3, knight takes bishop, and bishop d4 is winning for black. So position number 3, black to move, black is winning. This one is from a position by one of the greatest masters in chess history, Botvinnik. So black to move, black is winning. I will explain it very soon. The right move for black in this position, observe the queen is dependent on the bishop, observe the bishop is on the same line as the king, so we can take advantage of this by playing this move, bishop c5. This is very strong. We are getting the bishop on e3, and probably the only interesting move white can try here is queen takes queen, and then we can play pawn takes queen. One more time, there's a problem with the bishop, and now the queen is not a dependent piece on d2. However, there's a passed pawn on the 6th rank is going to create many problems for white as well. Even if white plays king f2, well, we just play here d2, there's a still a pin, so the bishop cannot take, and after king e2, bishop takes bishop is winning for black. Tactic position number 4, black to move, and black is winning. The way to continue here is by playing another sacrifice, and the idea of the sacrifice is going to be to clear this line for the bishop. So we can play here knight takes e4, and if the bishop takes e4, we can just remove the defender with bishop takes c3, and the idea is that now we're getting the bishop back on e4. In the game, white just took with the knight, and this is actually a blunder because they are gonna receive checkmate in 3 moves. After bishop takes b2, instead of taking with the queen, we can take with the bishop, then we can play bishop c3, and then we can play queen b2. Now the bishop is covering the escape, so this is checkmate in 3. And finally, tactic position number 5, black is winning here. I will give you some seconds as you try to find it. The way to win as black in this position is going to start by playing bishop d4. Remember, there is a pin here, so white cannot capture that bishop. Other moves like rook f2 or bishop e3 are losing material. Rook f2 is losing the exchange if we want. And about bishop e3, then as the bishop is going to be pinned, we can capture the pawn on f4, so it's definitely not going to work for white. So they might try king h1, but this is even worse. Here, black can play a very nice sacrifice on g3 to open that file, and to make sure our queen goes from a5 to h5. So we can play knight g3 check, white needs to capture, and then queen h5. It's not mate because they can still block with the knight, but of course we are getting the queen on e2. So after knight h2, bishop takes queen. This is getting decisive advantage for black. If you guys have any question, let me know in the comments. If you want to learn how to play pawn c&e opening, it's a dynamic and tricky opening as white. Check out this interesting video. I'm sure you will enjoy it and it will help you a lot. Thank you so much, guys. Like, subscribe. See you on the next.